Psychiatrist, what do you think is the challenge that the politicians have to face up to?
Actually, I'm a clinical psychologist. I think that it's a case of that since 1987 there has been a much bigger rise in violence than you showed in your film. That is, between, say, 1950 and 1986, the average rate of increase was 3,000 crimes more a year. Since 1987, it's been 12,000 more crimes a year. But in the early 80s, it was only 4,000 crimes a year between 80 and 87. So 12,000, 3 times more crimes. Now, that is because there has been a vast... the Thatcher's children basically are coming out to play. And I feel that there is an enormous number of people out there today who were not there in 1979,
right,
who had violence-inducing childhoods and experiences.
OK, we'll come to the other two of you shortly. But could you
give us a brief resume, without scoring political points, gentlemen, about how you propose to address those problems raised there, those overture questions of the Home Secretary?
Yes, we've done a great deal to put in place what we need to deal with violent crime, and it's not a problem that is unique to this country. Since 1979, for example, it's doubled in virtually every country in the developed world except Germany. But it is... cameras have been introduced, and indeed they are not limited to town and city centres. I've seen them installed on estates like the Meadowell estate just outside Newcastle, where they are playing a tremendous part in improving the quality of life on those estates.
Let's go back to this question of the causes of crime. Oliver James, do you think it is possible to predict someone who is going to become a violent criminal, and how early can you predict it?
Well, it is claimed that you can predict with about an 80% accuracy from the age of 5. But the point is that, you know, Mr. Howard has a perfectly valid point in the sense that there has been violence increasing at about 10% a year since 1950. And that is one problem. And that is going to be a major challenge for whoever is the next government. And that has continued with them in the fire burning. Now, the trouble is, from where I'm sitting, 2 things happened after 1979 which were like pouring paraffin on this fire. The first one was, basically you have to understand that violence is caused by being poor, by being young and being male. The great majority of violence is done by those people. Poor young men who are violent differ from poor young men who aren't by the fact of their family childhood experiences. That is, they're beaten up. They, as Mark would probably be able to confirm, you very rarely meet a violent convicted criminal who was not badly beaten up as a child and who also had irritable and parents who rowed with each other a lot. Now, those sorts of factors and inconsistent punishment, those sort of factors are much more common in parents who have low incomes. This is a very well accepted fact. Everything I'm saying now is completely accepted. It follows, therefore, that if you increase the number of low-income families, you will get an increasing amount of violence against the person a few years later. What happened in this country? In 1979, 19% of boys were being brought up in a low-income family. By 1981, it was nearly 1/3. It's been at that figure ever since. 1/3 of boys being brought up in low-income families. No surprise, then, that in 1987, combined with the greedy is good, winner-loser, there's no such thing as a society, no wonder that we ended up with a huge increase in violence, and we've got this vast body of very nasty, aggressive people who had a rotten time in their childhood.
Michael, how do you think that what's happened since 1979 has, politically and socially, has nothing to do with the rise in violent crime?
Yes, I think...
The 2 things are completely separate.
Yeah, they are. And
what about you, Jack Straw?
But just let me add this. If you want to talk about the importance of improving the lot of people who are the
You've told us it's got nothing to do with the rise in violent crime. Therefore, this contribution is irrelevant with respect.
No, just let me make this point. No, because we think it's very important to deal with poverty and unemployment, whether or not it's related to crime, and we are dealing with those problems.
Oh, right, you have told us it's irrelevant. Therefore, that's beside the point, isn't it? Jack Straw.
Stunning statement. I mean, I do hold very strongly to the notion that however poor people are, they are responsible for their own actions. But to ignore the environment in which crime breeds is ridiculous. And it's not a view, by the way, Michael, that is shared by your right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Let me finish what I said.
You're misrepresenting what I said. Because Ken Clarke said that the best way of cutting crime was to give people jobs. And in many ways, he's right. And one of the things we want to see is the opportunity of work educational training for all these young men aged 16 to 25 who've been out of work for 6 months or more. I think it's a very important part of our policy.
You were saying, you started right off by saying you didn't...
We need to protect the public.
Fine, OK, you've made that point. Oliver James, do you get the impression that politicians, mainstream politicians, are seriously engaged with trying to solve this problem?
Well, I think that, to be fair, I mean, I think that the Tories, for example, have introduced some law, changed some law, which mean that very dangerous people who previously could get out on parole now can't, and I think that's very good. I've met men in prison who say they want to, have sex with a child and kill it. There's one that I actually met, and unfortunately he was let out. And I don't know whether he's done it, but I wouldn't be surprised. And people like that. There are psychopaths. There are impossible people.
Yeah, come on,
no amount of treatment will help.
Have they met the challenge?
No, I mean obviously. The broader picture, certainly, Brendan Underwood, it's a great mystery to me why Brendan Underwood hasn't been duplicated lots of times over, because it's no skin off your nose, it's mainly run by prison officers. It doesn't actually cost anymore to have a therapeutic community, and it really does work. And the other thing, of course, that's fundamental is the sort of Home Start style American projects of going into primary schools, getting the parents involved and trying to change things at the start.
I'm going to have to interrupt all of you there because we've got to move on. Thank you all very much.